Hello, welcome back to Hazel Jane Tarot. Today I am bringing you a hashtag Friends in Tarot, which is a video response to Emily's tarot magic. Now, Emily made this video a couple of months ago and it's taken me until now to get a chance to film it. So if you haven't already seen her original video, I will tag it or include a link to it below. So basically the idea is that Emily has thought up, there are 15 prompts to do with different types of friends, and then you have to choose which tarot deck in your collection would fit with being that kind of friend. So without further ado, we'll have a talk through them and I'll show you the decks that I've picked out. So the first one, the one that lives in this bag, is the BFF, so your best friend forever, the loyal friend who's always there for you. And for that, I've chosen the Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert. Now, the reason that the Gaian Tarot would be my BFF is because it is one of the decks that I've had for the longest, not this edition, but the Gaian Tarot is one that I got very early on in my tarot journey. In fact, when I came back to tarot a few years ago, the Gaian Tarot was actually the first deck that I bought and really started to work with. So it was my second only tarot deck that I ever had. And so these faces and these scenes and these beautiful hand-drawn coloured pencil illustrations by Joanna Powell Colbert, there she is, that's the card, that's her self-portrait. All these people feel like old friends to me now because I've used the deck so much. I'm so familiar with looking at it. I'm familiar with how these cards resonate for me in my life, and the sort of challenges of it and the messages of this deck. It has a lovely quality that really is, it is like a best friend forever, and I can come back to it anytime. I don't work with it all the time, but anytime I come back to it, it's really lovely and straightforward for me to work with. In a similar vein then, the second prompt was your long distance friend. So the friend that's always there for you, maybe that you don't see very often. I'm sure you, like me, you have friends who maybe live even in another country now and you don't see them that often. But when you do get back together again, that intimacy is always there. And one of the things that Emily said in her video was that, when you get together, you're not talking about the day-to-day mundane things of life because you only see each other occasionally. You're really getting into the big stuff when you do catch up. And that to me is like the Spirit Keeper's Tarot by Annabelle Wen. So I've pulled out here the Vitruvian edition, and the Spirit Keeper's Tarot is a deck that is really special. Annabelle's decks are, they're not overly, I was going to say they're expensive. They're not more expensive than others. When you buy them new, it's not, this isn't the most expensive deck in my collection. But it does have a special quality that makes me want to keep it safe and not be taking it out and bashing it about very, very much. It could read for day-to-day mundane readings very easily. It is a very readable deck, but it also does contain a lot of esoteric symbolism and Annabelle Wen's very specific way of looking at the tarot. And it is a deck that I used this year to do my year ahead reading, but it's not a deck that I have pulled out every week, in between times. So I don't handle it often, but when I do take this deck out, I tend to have a very deep and profound reading with it. So I thought that fitted really well into Emily's description of the long distance friend, who, even though you don't see it that often, when you do take it out, the connection is really there and you can get into the deep stuff. The next prompt is the Dreamer, and the one that I picked out for that is the Tarot of the Mystical Moments, which is the newest tarot deck in my collection. So the Dreamer, Emily described as the kind of friend who's maybe always looking out the window at school, or and that sort of quality. And and the sort of inner child quality that implies, I think, comes across to me in this beautiful, dreamy tarot deck. So the images are so imaginative and they really take you to another place. And so the idea of a dreamy friend who's maybe not quite always connected to the mundane day-to-day things of life, but has great imagination, great kind of power in that imagination. And also, you know, maybe there's like maybe traces of anxiety, or the people in these images and the facial expressions in these images, as well as just the dreamy content of them themselves, really made me think about a friend who is like a dreamer. And this deck really does connect with me in quite an intuitive way, and as well as thinking about the tarot meanings or looking up the little guidebook that comes with this deck, you're also sort of looking intuitively at the art and what messages that brings across. So it taps into that dreamy, imaginative side of the self as a reader. So I thought this card was the perfect fit for the friend who is a dreamer. Now, the friend from work was an interesting choice in the end, I found, and I went for the Numinous Tarot. So the friend from work, Emily described as that person who you see every day, who you talk to about the day-to-day mundane things of your life. You know, like a friend at work, you're maybe talking about something that's going on in the staff kitchen, or you know, problem that's happened at work, or an issue with your computer, or you know, things that happen depending on, you know, the type of your workplace. But I was also thinking very specifically of my best friend at work, who, in addition to those conversations, we have we're at very similar life stages in terms of parenting and other things, and we have a very kind of deep connection, as well as that day-to-day mundane friendship. And this deck, the Numinous Tarot, reminds me a little of that specific friend. But the deck itself, I find, does work in that day-to-day work friend way for me as well. Because one of my favourite things about the Numinous Tarot is the minor arcana, which are really easy to read, I think is maybe the, the easiest way to explain it. But while the quality of the art here is, you know, so colourful, and at times it's kind of otherworldly and magical, there's something about the way these cards visually express, you know, the metaphors of the minor arcana in particular, that I find just speaks to me very directly and clearly. And when I read with this deck, it just really speaks to my life, and I get those intuitive hits of what in my daily life and my lived experience this deck is referring to. So it's not a deck that I've been working with very much just very recently, but it is a deck that I have used for daily readings in the past, and I can kind of read with this deck for almost any topic, and I've read with it for friends, and particularly this friend from work that I'm thinking of, and they have really loved this deck, and it has really spoken to them. So for that reason, the Numinous Tarot is connecting as my friend from work. Now, the instant connection was a hard one to pick one for, because I think there's any number of tarot decks that could fall into that category. So the one I've chosen lives in this bag, and so as Emily described the instant connection, it's that person that you meet and you just immediately know you're going to get on. It makes me think of the kind of person who is just, you know, maybe they have something about them that you consider, you know, to you is a bit cool or intriguing, something maybe a little aspirational about that person that just really draws you to them. And then when you start chatting, you find you really connect. The kind of the instant connection reminds me of, you know, the kind of person that you would meet in the queue for the bathrooms in a nightclub when I was younger, and you just find you've got so much in common, and then you want to hang out more. And as Emily said in her video, that sort of instant connection isn't necessarily the friendship that lasts for years and years. It can be, but it can be just somebody that you maybe meet while you're traveling, and you hang out for a couple of weeks or a couple of days, and you have a really great time, and then you maybe move on and you don't see each other again. But that friendship and what they brought to your life is still really important, and maybe invigorating and exciting at that time in your life. So there's so many tarot decks that when you see the art, you just can't stop looking at it. You can't stop handling it. You really, you just think it is that this is the deck, And one of the decks that I had a very specific connection with when I got it first was the Dreamkeeper's Tarot. So the Dreamkeeper's Tarot was actually the first tarot deck that I bought directly from the artist. And it was not my first ever indie deck. That was the Numinous Tarot. But the Dreamkeeper's Tarot I had come across on social media, and I found myself going back again and again and again and again to look at these images on Liz Houston's Instagram. And at that time, I was breastfeeding a small baby, and I was awake often during the night, really late at night. And I remember sitting, while feeding my baby or rocking her to sleep in my arms in the middle of the night and just sitting scrolling through Liz Houston's Instagram and staring at these intriguing and beautiful and slightly creepy images. And I just couldn't get them out of my head. So I ended up at like 3:00 one morning ordering the deck directly from her from America. And when it arrived, I loved there's this kind of a buttery feel to the way these cards pass each other in my hands. And yeah, I just really loved looking at it and reading with it. It spoke to me more directly than I had expected, actually, with the style of the art. I thought it might be a little bit denser and harder to read, but I found it actually really easy to read with. And there's something as well about the specialness of that relationship with an artist when you start getting into buying indie decks, that instead of the deck being something that is a kind of a product that's very detached from people, when you're ordering the deck directly from the artist and you've actually, you've posted a picture with tagging the artist, and then they respond, or you're able to comment on their images and they answer you, or you get a little postcard with their signature when you buy the deck, or when you can start to, and that has maybe happened more with other artists and other indie decks I've bought since, but this was my very first experience of that, of feeling that direct connection that social media allows with an artist, and feeling like you're supporting them and supporting their work. So that feeling of being kind of infatuated with the relationship that's possible through a kind of relationship that's possible through supporting artists directly, as well as just my infatuation with the deck itself and the art and reading with it, made this a really good fit, I think, for that tag of that friend who's instant connection. This card just blows me away. It's so powerful. The 9 of Swords is actually one of the cards that can make and break a deck for me. And this one is so powerful. And I am only just now noticing this figure here, which the number of times I've handled this deck, I've never seen that detail before. So it's one of the things about a deck like this, like there's just so much detail to the art, and it's so immersive. Yeah, so anyway, you can tell I'm still infatuated with that deck, even though I haven't actually used it in quite a while. So that was my instant connection. The Dreamkeeper's Tarot by Liz Houston, which is now available as a mass market deck if you are interested in it. So the Brutally Honest Confidant, again, a lot of different decks could have fallen under this category. So the kind of friend who, when you tell them what's going on, they're not going to sugarcoat it. They're going to tell you straight what you need to do or where you yourself are going wrong, to be honest with yourself. And I felt like the Slow Tarot really has that quality for me as a tarot deck. I mean, although lots of other decks do as well, but this is the one that sort of stood out. Oh, this could be another one that was an instant connection too, actually. But so there's something about the quality of this art. So this is a deck by Lacey Bryant, another artist who I was able to, buy directly from. There's something about these characters. They're very expressive. And they're not all looking directly at you as a viewer, but a lot of them are. And there is that sense of being called out on your bullshit when you're working with this deck. Some of the cards, the images can be a little bit troubling. Like even this image of the Tower, it's different from the regular image of, the tower, stone tower struck by lightning. You have a sort of troubling elements to sort of think about and consider: the rain outside, the facial expression, who's knocked over the tower of cards there. Was it the boy standing there himself? Was it being the wind, or was it the cat even? There are things to consider. Some of the, like the way this Four of Coins, the way she's looking at you. So they can be quite challenging. And I think that the mood that this deck creates, it's really beautiful, but it's not like a dreamy world like the mystical moments where you kind of going to lose yourself in a reverie. It's more hard-hitting than that. And some of the cards I know in this deck, like this one of the Devil, or Temptation, have been a bit controversial for some people, but for me this deck reads very effectively, and certain cards do come up, like Temptation, again and again for me, calling me out on particular issues that I have to deal with. I mean, even look at this Judgment card, the hand reaching inside, and those mirrors reflecting you back on yourself. So yeah, it's a deep deck, this one. It's beautiful, but it's not, it doesn't soften things by any means. And yes, so that I think is a good one for that brutally honest confidant. Now we're about halfway through. The next one was the free spirit, the free-spirited friend, the one who you could sit up and talk all night with, the friend who, is just, marching to the beat of their own drum, really. And the one I thought for this was the Numinous Tarot, or not the Numinous, sorry, this is the Light Seers Tarot. And this is by Chris Ann, and this is the independent edition, because I backed this deck on Kickstarter. And one of the things where this deck, I suppose straightforwardly and aesthetically is a free spirit, is because just visually this deck, it has that sort of boho quality. The characters are all sort of dressed and presented in a way like sort of free-spirited characters, so it sort of fits that way. But it also makes me think of a few specific friends I have who, if you called them and they told you that they were heading off to do a residential yoga program, or they had started an acting course, or they were learning about crystal healing, or they had taken a new marketing course, or were doing a degree part-time, like I have a couple of friends like that who are just always heading off in interesting new directions, and they don't sit still for very long, and they don't get kind of bogged down in the mundane, always sort of trying new things. And that sort of free-spirited quality that I associate with those people, I also kind of see coming through in the illustrations in this deck. It is also kind of, there's an aspirational quality, I think, with this deck, where a friend like that, who's a real free spirit, can be somebody that you admire when you're stuck in your own sort of maybe the day-to-day. A friend like that can kind of shake you up a bit, but can also be somebody who feels a bit aspirational, like, oh, I'd like to be a bit more like that. And this deck is also, I think, a little bit aspirational. The people are really beautiful, and maybe there's a question, their style, and the world they seem to be living in seems like a kind of place that it would be nice to live, or nice to spend some time, nice to be a bit more like that, heading to the beach with a surfboard. So this deck is, I think, a good example of that, like that friend who's a free spirit. The next deck is the Wise Mentor. So Emily suggested choosing a deck that maybe embodies that older quality. And it's something that I know I've been talking to Old Soul Mermaid, to Bonnie, about a few times in the comments, and that is that there aren't a lot of decks that really explore that older energy, and a lot of decks have sort of young, beautiful bodies all the time, and there's very few older, beautiful bodies presented or in any decks. And one of the decks I have that does is the Story Medicine Tarot. And this deck really does feel like, I suppose even the name tells you that this deck has been designed with the idea of stories being medicine. Like, so Jessica Zinchuk is the name of the creator, and each of the suits follows a particular story that she has created, but you can sort of create and work with your own stories through this deck as well. And there is a kind of it sort of seems to me to explore a telling of stories, particularly to do with women and women's bodies. So as I show you some cards, just be warned, there's quite a lot of nudity, and some of the images are a little bit confronting. If that's not your cup of tea, maybe shuttle forward a little bit from now. So this deck feels to me like a conversation with an older woman about her experience of the menopause, or talking to another mother about her experience of childbirth, or talking to a female friend about fertility problems or menstruation, or, you know, it's very embedded in a sort of embodied like experience of living in a female body. And I find this deck is quite powerful to work with and can be quite confronting at times, and it can be very healing. And I know I've heard of other people working with it describing it as having been very healing for them, exploring body acceptance issues or fertility issues or menstrual difficulties and all sorts of things like that. I don't think it's limited to only dealing with those issues, but it does kind of resonate with that for me very much. So the idea of a wise mentor, an older crone kind of character, although the creator Jessica Zinchuk is by no means a crone herself, but that sort of slightly older woman with knowledge and lived and embodied experience to share certainly comes through for me in the art in this particular deck. So I mean, just that, the rootedness of that card is just it's amazing. So anyway, it definitely wouldn't be for everybody, but for anybody who is, I think for me, just with the body that I live in, this deck is something that speaks to me in that way. So what's the next one? The friend you can be totally honest with without any judgment. So for that, I just, it was quite an easy choice actually, was the Housewives Tarot. And again, this is not a deck I use that often, but if I was going to read tarot for a group of friends at a party or something, this is probably the deck I would use, because it has a real sense of humour to it. And when I thought about a friend that you can be totally honest with without judgment, it made me think of mum friends. So, I mean, this is a very specific thing. As a mum of a young child, of a toddler, I have a group of friends that I met when she was a very little baby at mum and baby support groups locally. And the support that those particular girls have provided to me as a mum and as a person is very much that kind of being honest without judgment, you know, where you can say, you can be honest about difficulties you might be having with your child's sleep or feeding or how you've been feeling yourself, or, you know, you don't have to pretend that your house is spotlessly clean all the time, or that, you know, all the meals you prepare are, you know, organic and whatever. Like, you know, you can be just honest, and you can have a laugh about it, and you can there's a kind of maybe a bite to the humor, a bit of dark humor as you joke with each other about you know, the highs and lows of motherhood. And I mean, that doesn't just, obviously that type of friendship doesn't just apply to motherhood, but in my life, that has been a particular kind of evolution of friendship, where you know, it's just that there's something in like the images in these cards as well that have that sort of, I don't know, it's that tongue-in-cheek, that joking about the expectations on you, how things are supposed to look, maybe your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your partner, where people are and are not meeting your expectations. And this deck really just plays with all of that, using the 1950s imagery of like the perfect home, but you know, doing it with humor. So yeah, this to me is like that friend, the one you can be totally honest without judgment, and you can share, maybe if you ever get a bit of time away, you can share a wee gin and have a wee chat about things in person or online or however you get to communicate. So that is my friend you can be totally honest with without judgment, the Housewives Tarot. Now, an oldest friend, one who is like a sibling, I ended up going for the Rider-Waite-Smith, and this is not actually my oldest deck by any means. I've only had this since last October, but I was thinking about, you know, that really old friend who Emily said it feels like a sibling, you know, the kind of person who lets themselves into your house and shouts hello as they're on their way in. They're not waiting outside. They can put on the kettle and make their own tea. You know, they don't need you to explain things or stand on ceremony with them. And that to me feels a little bit like this Rider-Waite-Smith, although this particular physical copy of the deck I do treat with care because it's a vintage copy. It's the imagery and the iconography of the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot, even though I didn't have a copy for quite a while when I started getting into tarot. Every book that I had was sort of really permeated with this imagery, and so learning the tarot was really learning this system in the beginning, even though I was using, say, the Gaian tarot as my first proper deck as I was getting back into tarot. So it just sort of is here. It underpins a lot of the decks that I work with, and I don't have to sit for a long time and think about what does this imagery mean, or what does this card say to me, because I'm so familiar with the cards and their meanings and the images. There's no kind of shock when the image comes out because you've seen them so many times before. So that sort of familiarity of that oldest friend who really feels like they're just part of the furniture is, I think, a good fit with the Rider-Waite-Smith. The next deck she asked us to pick was a spiritual advisor, which was an interesting idea, and I chose the Mysteries of Mary tarot deck by Hettienne Grobler. So this is a deck that specifically deals with Mary. So Mary, the Mother of God, Mary, as we call in Ireland, Our Lady. And it's very much steeped in Catholic mysticism around Mary, although this deck goes beyond that. The book is very spiritual in the way that the reflections on each card are written. There are some divinatory meanings in the book, but it does take you into which aspect of Mary is being presented in each image. I mean, like here we have the flowering cross, so it doesn't just show Mary, but people who are related to Mary herself. So when I pull a card from this deck and each reading from the guidebook that I read, it is very much like a spiritual experience where the little reflections are taking you deeper into your kind of understanding of and connection with Mary, and they are like reading a little spiritual passage. So this deck, I think, is very much like a spiritual advisor, and working with this deck has helped me to kind of move things along a little bit in my own spiritual journey, where I was raised in a Catholic background but no longer wish to subscribe to the institution of the church, and I've been trying to find ways of connecting with the spirituality that I grew up with without the sort of formal kind of structures that I also grew up with. So working with a deck like this and seeing the way that knowledge and has been expressed through a tarot deck has been a really nice experience for me. So that is the Mysteries of Mary tarot deck, and that is my spiritual advisor choice. Now, the next one is the Witchy Friend. And that was a little bit harder to pick than you might have thought. I think I would have had lots of witchy decks, but there weren't any that there weren't that many that spoke to me as being particularly witchy. But the Fairy Wicca Tarot definitely falls into that category for me. So this is a deck that I haven't really read with very much yet. I bought it because the card names are in Irish and all the major arcana and court cards feature characters from Irish mythology, so gods and goddesses and heroes and so on, from the Irish myth cycles. I have previously posted a video about the names of the cards and how to pronounce them in Irish, which you can find on my channel, and I have read the book Fairy Wicca by Kisma Stepanich, and I've got a review of that book on my channel as well. And Fairy Wicca is a very specific religion and kind of a witchcraft practice that is very much it's like a very fully developed system, and yeah, it's very it's very detailed, and definitely has, for me, this deck does have a kind of a witchy feel to it. So the deck is very much about exploring connection with the fairy as embodied by the Tuatha Dé Danann and the sort of gods and goddesses of ancient Ireland, but also, and the heroes and so on. But also there's a concept in this deck of like 4 realms of fairy represented by the 4 provinces of Ireland, and that the minor arcana are like a journey into and towards each of those realms. It's not something I've explored terribly in a lot of detail yet. So it still has that kind of sense of mystery and something I don't quite understand, which is, you know, just feels a little witchy and spiritual and connecting with fairies and so on. It's something that, yeah, I mean, you can see by the style of the art and so on, some of the images are quite abstract, and it's not clear like what exactly is happening here, you know, with these 8 wands and the fire and the green candle and so on. You know, there's a lot of witchy symbolism, and this is a deck that I know I'm going to journey more deeply with, even though I'm not particularly confident on the idea of wanting to call on or connect with the fairy, particularly that particular aspect of it. But in terms of having a deck that really works with the energies of Celtic Ireland, and that is the side, and using the Irish language in my tarot reading, that's a side that I definitely do want to explore. So yes, there's definitely something mysterious and powerful and interesting with this deck, and the fact that a lot of my sort of YouTube friends have also started looking at this deck and working with this deck, it makes, you know, creates that sense of connection too. So it maybe seems like my witchy friend is the Fairy Wicca Tarot. So there's only a couple left. The next one is the opposite, and the card I've picked for that is the Wheel of the Year Tarot. So this is a mass market deck that I picked up a month or so ago, and it's a deck that I hadn't had on my wish list, and I just sort of picked it up spontaneously in a shop. And initially I thought it wasn't the kind of thing I was going to like. You know, so just where we have, you know, there's friends who on the surface you maybe don't have that much in common, but as you get to know each other, you find that actually you connect really well. That is something that I've maybe noticed about this deck. So, you know, initially the sort of very perfect curvy bodies, the sort of comic book hero type people physically presented, and the kind of oddness of things like the, you know, the scale here of these 2 fighting inside a nut, and the presence of fairies, which isn't usually my cup of tea. Like kind of little winged fairies in a deck isn't something I normally go for, and everybody's white, and it's not a very diverse deck at all, and all the families that are shown are kind of like mom and dad and 2 kids, and you know, it maybe felt on the first flip through like it was kind of a bit cliched as a deck, but kind of despite myself, I've found I really get on well with this deck, as it were. It reads really clearly for me, and it's been one that I've worked with a lot and I just keep reaching for. So despite the sort of Thumbelina getting married in a flower vibes that there are in some of the cards. Yeah, this has been a card that's kind of like an opposites attract situation for me, and like that, which I do have in my life, those friends who on paper you maybe don't have that much in common with, but actually you get on really well. Two more left. This one is the country loving friend, and I went for with this the Herb Crafter's Tarot. So this is an absolutely beautiful deck, which is illustrated by Joanna Powell Colbert of Gaian Tarot fame, and the book is written by Letitia Guthrie, and it's a really educational deck, as it explores the medicinal and other properties of a whole range of plants. And I think I have a kind of an aspiration that I would like to be the kind of person who knows about different plant energies and could be a bit of a kitchen witch and prepare things, remedies for myself and my family. That's something I would like to be able to do, but I sort of flit around from one thing to another, and I haven't really got in deep with it. But I was struck looking at this deck today and thinking about that prompt of the country loving friend. I was thinking about Emily herself, of Emily's Tarot Magic, who created this prompt, and those lovely little short videos she's been creating about different herbs and plants that she finds in the vicinity of where she lives, where she talks a little bit about harvesting plants and working with them. And those little short videos are fantastic. If you haven't already watched them, I'll see if I can link, if she's got a playlist of those, I'll try to link that below. But this deck reminded me of Emily. So if you're watching Emily, this deck reminded me of you. And that connection to the plants around you. Because this is an American deck. So there are plants that grow and are described in this deck that I've never seen, and that don't grow in my neighborhood. And some of the videos that Emily was making about the plants that actually grow around her, it made me think about, connecting with what is in my locality. So yes, this idea of the friend who is the country loving friend who understands about, and it's maybe like a little bit witchy as well. It made me think of the Herb Crafter's Tarot and made me think about Emily herself. So the last one then, Emily described as the popular friend. And for the popular friend, I went for the Afro Goddess Tarot Arcanas. So the way I was thinking about this prompt is that person who you maybe see from a distance before you know them well. You maybe know of them before you know them. Like that friend who you maybe, before you got to know them, you used to see them in school, or you saw them dancing in a nightclub with their boyfriend or their girlfriend, or you saw them move through the world in a way that was really compelling, and they're popular with other people, and you can sort of see why they have a magnetism about them, but they maybe seem like, I don't know, like that magnetism that the person has. But then when you get to know them, you can see the vulnerability of the person, and they really, you can see so many more dimensions to them. And the Afro Goddess Tarot Arcana made me think of that type of friend, because first of all, just physically, this deck is the most beautiful deck. It just feels amazing. It smells amazing. It handles beautifully. It is just a gorgeous deck. So art aside, just the physical object is beautiful. And then the cards hold these images of these absolutely gorgeous, really beautiful people, mostly women, but the men in this deck are lovely as well. So the people presented in this deck are gorgeous, and maybe, if you look at these pictures, like it's maybe looks like the kind of relationship that you might see from a distance and envy, because it's just lovely. Like this gorgeous, confident, strong woman that you see in these decks and in these images of this the goddess characters that are being portrayed. But you also see in these cards, the challenges of life, the softness, the vulnerability. There's a whole range of emotion here. So it does make me think of that person that you see from a distance and their life seems really perfect, and they seem really just, they have it all together. But then when you get to know them, you start to see that vulnerability and you really connect on a deeper level as well. And that this deck is a deck that is just reads beautifully, and you know, for all sorts of topics and issues. And it's one that I admired for a while before I actually, again, you know, looking at pictures of it online and looking at it again and again on an online shop before I actually went for it and bought it, because it was a bit pricey, but it is a beautiful deck and it reads really, really well. So this is the one I have gone for as my popular friend deck. So if you've watched all this time, wow, it's ended up being quite a long video, 40 minutes. Thank you so much for sticking with me all this time. And I would love to hear what you think of some of my choices. If you would have picked some of those decks, but maybe put them in different categories. I mean, because obviously some of these decks could apply in lots of different categories. If you haven't already, go check out Emily's Tarot Magic and her original video. And if you do a VR to this prompt, or if you have already done one, I might have missed it. So please do let me know in the comments below if you've done a VR to Emily's prompt, and I'll go check yours out as well, because it's a really fun tag. I mean, I don't really anthropomorphise my decks in my day-to-day use, but it was really nice thinking about the decks in this way and just using the VR prompt to go through my deck collection and look at the cards and shuffle some of these decks that I hadn't handled in a while. And that's one of the lovely things about VRs, isn't it? It sort of gets you using and looking at your decks in a new way. So thanks, Emily, for a great prompt. Sorry it's taken me so long to get around to doing it. And I will see you all back here again soon, hopefully. Bye.